Continuing with lecture day 6, on to further Persian retaliation. Now, what's that retaliation for? Well, first, the Ionian revolt, right? And the city of Sardis being destroyed by the Athenians and Eretrians. And while the Eretrians were attacked, the Athenians kind of got off scot-free because the army was going to attack Athens and landed at the beach of Marathon and was defeated. And so Darius wanted to plot revenge against Athens as well as all of Greece because he felt that all of Greece was kind of partially responsible, even though it was really just Athens. And so Darius wants to do something about it, but when he's about to send an army to go attack Greece, part of his empire revolts, and that part is Egypt. And so he has to send forces down to Egypt and fight them, and by the time he's finished doing that, he's getting extremely old, and he actually dies. And Xerxes, his son, now is king. And so Xerxes finishes off that Egyptian revolt, and brings all of Persia under control again. And so Xerxes is now the new king, and wants to continue the revenge plan that his father had set up. And so it's taken about 4 years, from the year 490 B.C.E., when the Battle of Marathon was, to the year 486 B.C.E., for Xerxes to have an army ready. And finally, another 6 years go by before that army is finally massed together. And he wanted the largest army possible. And so finally, by 480, 10 years after the Battle of Marathon was fought, he crosses the Hellespont. Okay, the Hellespont is the area of water right between basically Asia and Europe. Okay, is what many people count it as, okay? It's this little channel of water, strait of water that goes through here, okay? And the Hellespont is kind of like this area right here. He has an army that historical sources say was anywhere from 2 million to 5 million soldiers in it. 2 million to 5 million soldiers. That army is massive. Unfortunately, it's probably completely wrong. It was very much embellished, okay? When you actually look at some of the figures, and most of the figures that I give you are actually already divided and taking into account better numbers, okay? But in this case, this 2 million to 5 million is what is said by a lot of people, but really it is more likely only about 500,000 actual soldiers, maybe another 500,000 of, like, baggage attendants, servants. The Xerxes himself goes on this expedition, leading this army, so he's going to have a lot of his generals with him, and advisors. He's going to bring the royal court with him. He's going to bring a bunch of his own servants. He's going to bring a bunch of his belongings from home, from the palace, so that his tent is nice and stuff like that, and that's going to cause a lot of people to have to bring supplies and stuff on that, on wagons and ships. And so a lot of the probably another, say, 500,000 people was just that. And so it's probably only about 500,000 actual soldiers, and then maybe another 500,000 or even 250,000 of servants and, other helpers with the army. So back then, though, people were thinking it was like 1 million, 2 million, 5 million men. And several people like Herodotus, which we've already mentioned once, as getting the numbers wrong at the Battle of Marathon. He was one of the sources during this, and he also liked to embellish numbers, so that was why it was probably 2 million to 5 million, was people were using his sources. But from other evidence and other sources, it seems like it was only 500,000 total, which is still, at the time, in the ancient world, even now today, 500,000 men in one army is massive, massive army, okay? So he crosses the Hellespont in 480 BCE and starts marching along here, which is known as Thrace, and Thrace automatically just says, yes, we're part of the Persian Empire. And it had kind of been already Persian already. Well, then it starts getting to the Macedon, which is part of Greece, as well as other places in Greece, and some of these Greeks are automatically see the massive army coming at them and say, yes, we will surrender to Persia. And that's what he's hoping for. Xerxes is hoping to get a lot of them just to surrender so he doesn't have to fight all of them. and he will just all of a sudden basically rule all over Greece, and all he might have to fight is basically Athens, and maybe another one or two city-states. Well, many of the city-states, many of the most powerful city-states come together in a big meeting and start talking about this massive army coming at them, and they start deciding, what are we going to do? Are we going to fight it out individually, each city-state for themselves? Because at that point, all he has to do is just march from one to the other to the other. He could split his army, but he's probably not going to do that. No smart person would do that. And so they figure that he'd have to just march from one to one to one, and that's too big of an army. 500,000 is way too big for like maybe 10 or 20,000 soldiers in a city-state to be able to fight against. And so the Hellenic League starts deciding, we will come together, and that's what is formed out of this, is these city-states that decide to fight against Xerxes are called the Hellenic League. And that is Athens, Sparta, and Corinth, and a few others that resist. Okay, don't worry about the others. Athens, Sparta, and Corinth. Those are the most important ones. Okay? And so those ones decide that they're going to resist together. And then they find out what Xerxes' real plan is probably going to be. And they realize it's to destroy the city of Athens. It is to completely destroy the city of Athens no matter what, and kill every single last Athenian man, woman, or child, or at least, or maybe even sell some of them into slavery, even though the Persians don't use slaves that much. But, so it's this idea that Athens is like, okay, they're coming for us. What are we going to do? And so the others start coming up with a plan. And that plan is to try to fight as long as possible to give time for the people of Athens to evacuate from the city. And so in August to September of 480 B.C.E., we're going to have the Battle of Thermopylae, okay, which is going to be this kind of fight here to stop the, before the before the Persian army is able to make it all the way down to Greece and make it to Athens. Okay, and so the evacuation of the city of Athens is happening. The entire city is going to move from Athens to somewhere else, but it's going to take time to move a ton of people and a few of their meager belongings, or at least supplies, to another place. Okay, well, Sparta steps up and says that they want to help because they're part of this Hellenic League. However, the Spartan government, the Spartan Apella, okay, the main group of the citizens' assembly of Sparta, says, you can't take an army to do this, to then one of the two kings, Leonidas. Leonidas, pictured in that statue from the beginning of the lecture. There he is again. And Leonidas is told that by the Apella, you cannot leave with an army to go fight against the Persian army, even to help the Athenians right now, because we've got a festival, another religious festival. It's very similar to the one that happened 10 years prior in the year 490, during the Battle of Marathon, when Sparta said, oh, we've got a religious festival, we can't make it. It wasn't an excuse. It was, they actually are very serious about their religion. Ancient peoples were. And so, people today, many of them are extremely, thoughtful about their religions and take a lot of things about their religion into account for things. And so back then it ruled people's lives. And so the Spartans were not allowed to send an army, or could not send an army by law, according to this festival and this religious ceremony they had to worship. At the end of it, which was like a 2 or 3 day long festival, then they could send an army. But by then, it would be too late, and the Persian army would probably already be in Athens by then. And they right now have to buy time. So what King Leonidas decides is, because he wants to defy the orders and the tradition, he basically says, well, I'm just going to take a walk, and since I am a king, my bodyguard comes with me wherever I go. And that bodyguard is 300 hoplites, okay? 300 Spartan hoplites. Remember, they are trained basically almost their entire lives, and they're in their 30s to 40s years old, sometimes even slightly younger, and they're all trained since almost birth, to be a warrior. And so he decides that is going to be what he's going to be able to do to help out the Athenians. And so he takes a bodyguard of 300 men and leaves from Sparta and travels up all the way to here. And he also tells a bunch of other Greeks along the way, this is where we're going. We're going to meet the Persian army at the pass of Thermopylae. The pass of Thermopylae. Thermopylae is right here, in name, okay, written out. It means the Hot Gates, okay, or is nicknamed the Hot Gates. It's named the Hot Gates because there's a bunch of hot springs in the area. And it's a mountain pass. And here it actually is right here. This is Thermopylae. You can see the water off to the side. It's or kind of like there's a bit of a river right there. But right here you kind of has the mountain. You've got the plains, and then on the other side of this there's a bit more of hills and rocky hills and mountain as well. And then a little bit past that, just kind of like water, the water of the sea. Okay, and so it's this kind of mountain pass that you can go through this area between the mountains to get further south. Because again, Greece is extremely mountainous. Well, he gets there with his bodyguard of 300 Spartans, plus about several thousand other Greeks, and I've got that little squiggly line, which means about 7,000 other Greeks, okay? Many of them were hoplites, many of them also were archers, some of them, that with bows and arrows, but most of them were hoplites. And who are the best soldiers out of all of them? Well, the Spartans, yes, but there's only 300 of them. Leonidas and his soldiers decide that they are going to be the front row of soldiers, and they're going to have some of the other Greeks kind of right next to them, and that they'll have the archers behind. Well, at that point, the Persian army gets to just about a mile or so away from the Greek hoplites and Leonidas's army, standing in the pass, and Xerxes sends a message to Leonidas saying, surrender or die. And Leonidas says, no, we're not going to surrender. And so Xerxes' response is, well, we're going to shoot you with enough arrows, okay, from our army to blot out the sun. And Leonidas's response is a very sarcastic and kind of confident response and snap back of, well, we'll fight in the shade. If you're going to fire enough arrows up into the air to blot out the sun, we'll just fight in the shade. As if he doesn't care about the threat. That they'll just use their big giant hoplon, remember, the shield, to over their heads and block it. And that's exactly what happens, is the Persians end up firing thousands of arrows at the Leonidas and the other hoplites of the Greeks, and they just put their shields up in the air, and it just hits against them, and so many of them are fine. Most of the army is fine of the Greeks. And so at that point, Xerxes sends in his real army, his soldiers. And they have the fighting going on, and they have massive phalanx versus kind of looser troops, which aren't fighting in tight formation. While the phalanx, 3 or 4 people behind just the first person in the row is going to be able to stab at the same person, same enemy. And so it's kind of like this big kind of porcupine fighting, and they've got shields to block. And so the Spartans on the first day do great, as well as the rest of the several thousand Greeks. And then on the second day, it happens again. The Greeks win again. And yes, they're outnumbered, but the numbers don't matter, because there's mountain pass. The pass is very small. Only maybe about 100 or so people next to each other can get through this mountain pass, okay? And so, yes, there's 500,000 Persians and only about 7,300, Spartans and Greeks, but only about 100 to 200 people are fighting at a time. And then because of the spears, maybe an extra 200 or 300 behind that first, group of Greeks are still fighting because of their spears with the phalanx formation. And the Xerxes' forces didn't really know how to do that kind of formation. And so for the first 2 days of fighting, the Greeks are winning. And it gets to the point where Xerxes' army is almost refusing to go in on the third day. But Xerxes has sent out spies and bribes to the people that live in the area, and has told them that basically, if they don't surrender to him or work with him, that they'll die. And he also promises them tons of money if they do. And so one of these people, a goat herder that lives in the mountains, okay, and herds goats up and down the mountains, says he doesn't want to die and he wants the money. And so he goes to Xerxes and he tells Xerxes about this hidden little pass, this hidden little trail up through the mountains. and that can go up over one mountain and get round to the back of the Thermopylae Pass. And so Xerxes at night of the second day sends his army up in the hills, a bunch of the archers up into the mountain along that pass, as well as a bunch of soldiers on the behind area back here. And so then you have the Persian army coming from one side, you've got the Spartans and all the Greeks in the middle, and then they wake up the next day and they realize that they're completely surrounded by Persians on one side, Persians on the other. And so Leonidas tells his bodyguard of 300 Spartans that they're going to stay and fight to the end, and he tells a lot of the other Greeks to take little trails through the mountains and escape, and warn Athens that we've bought you 2 days, we're going to buy you part of the third day, but we're going to die doing it. And so eventually what ends up happening is many of the arrows rain down from the mountainside. Again, maybe not enough to blot out the sun and make it actual shade, but tons in this idea come down from the mountains, from the archers of the Persians onto the Greeks, as well as attacking it from both sides, the Persian sides on both sides for the Greek army, and Leonidas, his bodyguard of 300 men, and who knows how many other Greeks all died there, while a bunch of the other Greeks left and told Athens what was happening. So they were surrounded by many archers and completely eradicated. So Leonidas was killed in this battle, and he's remembered as a hero, and there's been comic books and movies, multiple movies, and multiple comic books, and multiple stories and other books, and tons of other pop culture all about Leonidas and his bodyguard of 300, which usually it always kind of embellishes the fighting, and it's not real good phalanx fighting, and sometimes it doesn't really tell about the other Greeks, but there were other Greeks there. Well, at that point, the Persians start moving from here, Thermopylae, down towards Athens, and the leader of Athens is a man named Themistocles, right there. His nose is broken off in this picture, but that is Themistocles. He is the Athenian leader of not just the government, but he's one of their military leaders, and he has prepared Athenians for invasion by evacuating the city, and he is also very loved by the navy of the Greeks, or at least the Athenians. And the Athenian navy was very strong at the time. 200 warships, 200 triremes. This is what a trireme looks like. A very thin ship with people that row with the oars in the lower deck. On the top deck, there's no sail or anything like that. It's just a flat area with maybe a ladder down to the bottom under the ship itself, or where the ship is itself underneath, where all the rowers are. And there's 3 rows of oarsmen, okay? 3 rows, meaning tri, okay? So there would be tons and tons of people rowing the ships on both sides at the bottom, and then all the soldiers on the warship would stand up the top. And what it would have is it has this very strong metal beak, kind of, or prow of the ship that was just under the waterline. That was very good for, like, cutting through the water, but the most important part was, as you can see here, was this one rams into the other side of the other one. And what it would do is, right when it rams into it, all the soldiers from this ship would try to jump aboard the other ship, and they would start fighting between the 2 ships. So it was kind of almost as if they were fighting on land in big formations of kind of like the Phalanx formation, but on the water, on top of a boat. They were using the boat as opposed to the ground. And so that's how a trireme fought, okay? Well, he's got 200 of those, manned and ready. But what's he going to do with them? Well, that's the question. So, what is the plan that Themistocles has come up with? Well, Themistocles has evacuated the city of Athens, all the people, to an island called Salamis, okay, or Salami, which, if you look on this map, you can kind of see Athens, and there's this tiny little blue dot right there. Well, that's where he's planning evacuating them to. He also, and he has evacuated them, the days that Thermopylae bought them were vital to the people of of Athens, and the people of the Athenians were able to evacuate to this city using the boats, and then the army was able to get on these ships, ready to fight against the Persians. Well, how are we going to use the navy against an army, right? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. The Persians reach Athens. The Persian army of Xerxes reaches Athens, and he gets in the city gates, and he barges through the city gates, and he finds the entire city completely empty. Not a single person in it. And Xerxes had already planned on burning it down. Well, now he's even angrier, so he destroys the whole city. The entire city is burned down. And Themistocles, at night, goes and speaks to the Persians. And he starts talking to Darius's, or Xerxes's, officers, military officers. And Themistocles at this point is acting like he's got secrets and he wants to join the Xerxes' side and Persian side and to spare his own life. But it's really a trick, because when he goes to speak with the Persians, he tells Persia, yes, we have retreated from the city of Athens to the island of Salamis on this map there. But he tells them lies. He says that the navy is very far away. It's on the far side of Greece. The people are on the island of Salamis and they're basically undefended. Both of these are things that are complete lies. Well, in September of 480 B.C.E., Xerxes gets his ships and starts picking up some of his men on the ships near the port of Athens and sails across the bay towards Salamis. And most of the fleet of the Persian fleet are these big, giant cargo ships that are very, very slow. The soldiers on them are not used to fighting on the ships. They're used to fighting on the ground. Persia uses lots of chariots. Persia uses lots of camels and horsemen and stuff. Things that aren't very good against hoplites and definitely aren't good against people on a ship and can't be used on a ship, right? But he doesn't think that they're going to fight on the ships. He's thinking that he's going to get onto the island of Salamis and send all of his army attacking on the island. Well, at that point, as they are sailing from Athens to Salamis, the 200 Athenian ships of the Athenian navy show up from in behind the bay right here. As you can see, this is a picture from a plane, and the ships would have been all here and attack all of a sudden the Persian ships. 200 ships show up that weren't supposed to be there, according to Themistocles. Well, Themistocles was lying to trap the Persians. And so the Persians are trapped between the coast of the ground, and these slow-moving Persian ships can't get out the way, and these Athenian fast ships are able to ram into the Persian ships and send all of their soldiers over to the Persian ships and kill all the Persian crew members and soldiers on their ships, and burn the ships and sink the ships. And the Athenian navy destroys most of the Persian navy, and it is a massive Athenian victory, the Battle of Salamis. So, we will talk about the last bit of the further Persian retaliation, as well as a couple things that lead us up to our next lecture in the next video, which will be very short.